welcome to Literary Prospects, where we talk to authors and literary professionals about books, publishing, and the writing life. I'm Kelley Vick. I'm the host of the program, and in just a moment, it will be my pleasure to introduce today's guest. But first, a reminder that if you like what you hear, please do take a moment to subscribe. It helps us out, and you can make sure you never miss an episode. Also, we've opened a Literary Prospects shop, so if you're looking for bookish shirts, totes, and gifts, please check that out at literaryprospects.etsy.com. And to grab books featured on the podcast and check out more curated book lists, you can visit the Literary Prospects bookstore on bookshop.org. We'll leave all those links below in the show notes. And now, let's introduce today's guest. Iman Hariri-Kia is a writer, editor, and author born and based in New York City. A Forbes 30 Under 30 honoree and an award-winning journalist, she covers sex, relationships, identity, and adolescence. Her work has appeared in Vogue, New York Magazine's The Cut, Harper's Bazaar, Cosmopolitan, Teen Vogue, and more. Her debut novel, 100 Other Girls, was published in July 2022 to critical acclaim. Her sophomore novel, The Most Famous Girl in the World, is out now. Iman Hariri-Kia, thank you so much for joining today, and a huge congratulations on your sophomore novel, The Most Famous Girl in the World. Author Carly Fortune says reading The Most Famous Girl in the World is like riding a roller coaster through the dark. Iman Hariri-Kia takes readers on a thrilling, fast-paced adventure, incredibly fun and deliciously chaotic. Author Amanda Montell says no one's voice sparkles with camp and au courant humor like Iman Hariri-Kia. Combined with this gasp-inducing, galloping plot centering on female celebrity obsession, Hariri-Kia has penned a thrilling romp. Author Laura Harkin says, outrageously fun, but also sharp and clear-eyed, The Most Famous Girl in the World is the perfect novel for our scammer-obsessed age, an unapologetic satire filled with surprising humor and heart. And one more, author Lila Sage says, clever, cutting, and completely unputdownable. The Most Famous Girl in the World is awash with humor, authenticity, and a dash of heat, all with a unique edge. Hariri-Kia's voice is the sharpest blade I've come across. So with all of that, what can you tell us about The Most Famous Girl in the World?
Oh my gosh. Well, my debut novel, 100 Other Girls, came out now, oh my gosh, 2 years ago. Wild. Time flies. And I really feel like 100 Other Girls was the book that I needed to write. Writing it felt like getting something off my chest, clearing my throat, sort of wiping my slate clean. But The Most Famous Girl in the World is really the book of my heart. It's the book I got to dream up. It's the book I really wanted to write. I really think that it's fun, funny, poignant, sort of today's conversation, but it's written in a way that I hope will be accessible for readers. It's a quick read. It's hopefully something that you can get lost in. I want people to like laugh, gasp, and think is my three big my three big words. So perfect for fans of Inventing Anna and Killing Eve. This is sort of a campy, satirical cat and mouse chase about celebrities, gamer culture. This book follows Rose, who's a Middle Eastern American reporter and functional train wreck, truly. She goes down this downward spiral of guilt and obsession because she's convinced that the subject of her most successful story, a socialite grifter a la Anna Delvey named Poppy Hastings, is quietly killing off of her sources in plain sight. The only problem is that absolutely nobody in her life, from her best friends to her coworkers, believes her, with the exception of this handsome but incredibly mysterious and suspicious FBI agent. So the two of them go on this epic quest to prove that there's more to Poppy than meets the eyes, and of course, chaos ensues. So I really hope that readers who are looking for a total mishmash of genre, um, satire, thriller, true crime, mystery, romance, this book has it all. And I hope that that will make for a delicious fall read. Thank
Yes. Yes, it will.
you.
Um, what was the jumping off point with this story for you? You said this was the book you really wanted to write. How did that idea first come to you?
Well, I have always been incredibly inspired by conversations going on in the cultural zeitgeist. That was true for 100 Other Girls, and this was true for the most famous girl in the world. And when people ask me questions about writer's block and inspiration, like my number one piece of advice is sort of to perk up, open up your ears, eavesdrop, people watch, just pay attention to the comings and goings of the people around you, because oftentimes real life is even more fascinating than fiction. And life imitates art, art imitates life. So, this particular story, I was actually at dinner with friends and my then fiance when the news broke that the then president of the United States had promised to send a limousine to prison to pardon the Tiger King, who was a reality TV star who at the time was serving a sentence for attempted murder for hire. And my fiance turned to me and said, you know, can you imagine if the most famous person in the world was an actual murderer and people just didn't give a shit? And me being a writer, I was like, wait, can you say that again a little bit slower? Let me pull up my notes app. And immediately the wheels in my brain started to turn. And the concept for the most famous girl in the world was born later that day.
Of course, as I'm reading this book, I'm thinking about, you mentioned Anna Delvey, Caroline Calloway, Elizabeth Holmes. Why do you think, as a culture, we are so enamored with scam artists and female scam artists, maybe in particular?
Yeah, I know it's so funny because since I first had the idea for the book, since my fiance first asked me that question, I actually feel like it's become even more relevant in today's cultural conversations, which is wild. I mean, Anna Delvey literally is going on Dancing with the Stars with an ankle monitor. How, no, I couldn't, even I'm not that powerful that I could. She's hosting New York fashion shows. I mean, Elizabeth Holmes has given herself a redemption arc. She's rebranded herself as Liz, who's, you know, just an apologetic mother. Gypsy Rose Blanchard has become like the people's princess.
Mhm.
She's expecting, she's writing her own memoir. And it's true, like more than ever, I think society is obsessed with anti-heroines and women's wrongs and the lore behind women's ill-fated decisions. And I think to a certain extent, these people, as long as they're authentic, as long as um, they behave in a way that resonates with their audience, um, we are willing to forgive them for all of their wrongdoing. It's more of a question of why do people who do bad things make us feel so good about ourselves? And are they holding a mirror to the parts of ourselves that maybe we want forgiveness for, or we want people to find lovable? But, you know, how far would a charming celebrity con have to go to permanently turn public opinion against them? You know, that's the question I'm fascinated by. And that's the question that me, Rose, and this like campy satire of a novel really want to ask the reader.
Yeah. You just said more than ever, America seems fascinated by anti-heroes, women's
Yeah.
wrongs, this conspiracy lore. And of course, we're looking at a kind of anti-hero in the Poppy Hastings
Yeah.
character. But I also see you exploring the anti-hero in Rose, our protagonist here. We see her spiraling. She's really questioning her own decisions in her life. Was it important for you to explore these themes from different angles in different characters?
Absolutely. I love a messy female protagonist.
Mhm.
But more than anything, it was really important for me to write Rose as complicated and complex and a woman who makes many, many, many mistakes, but then is also given the space to learn and grow. Because I think more often than not, women of color are not given the grace to do so on page
Mm.
in the same way as their white counterparts. So it was really, really important for me to underline that Middle Eastern women, don't exist as in a monolith in America, and that the way that, first generation Middle Eastern American women behave and have relationships to their first gen identity are varied, constantly evolving, dependent entirely on the individual. And I really, really wish I had had exposure to more like messy Middle Eastern American rep when I was coming of age. And I include coming of age as being, a young woman in my 20s, because I think we're constantly coming of age with every new phase of our lives.
Mhm.
So I'm hopeful that um, I'm hopeful that young women and also women who are on the other side, and honestly, anyone who has ever sort of questioned themselves and struggled to listen to their gut will see themselves in Rose, and also just give her grace and um, allow her to do bad things and take accountability and apologize for them and ask for help when she needs it and grow and recover. Because oftentimes, our paths toward the truth, whatever that may be, they're not linear. So,
Yeah. You've said that something you'd love to see change in publishing is to see novels with diverse protagonists be given equitable budgets. Can you
yeah,
talk about that?
absolutely. I've been very lucky in my position in that I definitely have had, wonderful experience with my publisher. I think that 100 Other Girls was definitely given, the mainstream treatment, and its audience found the novel, and the novel found its audience, and I'm really grateful for that. But um, it's true that novels written by anyone of marginalized identity and novels that feature protagonists with anyone of a marginalized identity are immediately categorized as niche subjects. And
Mhm.
what happens if a novel is categorized as niche is that there is a little bit of trepidation about whether the novel is going to find its mainstream audience. And if it doesn't find its mainstream audience, will it end up selling enough copies? And this all comes back to budgetary concerns, how much money gets allocated towards marketing, towards distribution. And, there are many different reasons why a book might end up on a bookseller's shelf, or a book might get placed in a magazine or in a roundup or reviewed by Booklist or whatever
Mhm.
the case may be. It's a lot more complicated than, the case I'm presenting it as. It's not always black and white, but oftentimes it's, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Authors um, are oftentimes being pushed by teams to get in front of the right audiences, to sell their book to the right librarians, to the right sellers, etc. And that puts them in a position to then reach more people. And the reason that their books are being given that opportunity is because they're the publisher considers them to have the best chance of reaching that big audience and earning out. Again, I want to say that I've had a wonderful experience with my publisher. I feel very blessed that they've invested a lot of time and attention in me, but I know that my story is very much not the norm for women of color writing about women of color. So, a lot of people will then ask, uh, what will happen if we all sort of acquiesce to the the suggested, the suggested bullet points for what will allow for a book to be mainstream and commercial, then we're going to lose representation in fiction. We're going to lose diverse voices. We're going to lose own voices. So truly, like the only way that we can help reverse um, this trend in publishing is by going out of our way to make sure that, for every um, book that we're reading that's by like a white cis straight author, we are going out of our way to pick up a book by a marginalized voice. And again, I don't want to put the onus on the reader, but if the change isn't going to come from the publishers proper, then we need to look to our purchasing power to say, how can we show publishers that there is real interest in marginalized voices? Because, I think during summer 2020, like a lot of marginalized voices got picked up by Big Five and mainstream publishers. But in the past couple of years, you can see those authors sort of being dropped by their editors. You've been able to see that perhaps they were given larger advances and then they didn't get marketing budget, or they didn't really get pushed um, onto shelves. And um, yeah, it's where you have to think about it from a stance of equity, not equality. If we're not all starting in the same place, then what can we do to make sure that everyone is at least given the boost that they need so that we're all able to give our books the same chance of success? I hope I was able to um, phrase that correctly.
I think that that was wonderful, and I really appreciate you talking about that because it's really important, and it's great to hear people speaking to that and encouraging people to go out and put the onus on the reader a little bit, and on the purchasing power.
I think it's a very like the system, like ultimately, I'm a huge reader.
Yeah.
I don't blame readers. I think that the system, like many systems in America, is a little bit fucked. It's driven by capitalism. So we have to start thinking like, if every dollar counts, how can we use every dollar toward like putting it towards our common goal? So that's, again, I'm on y'all's side. I just want to see my marginalized besties getting big book deals, and I want to be able to go to a Hudson News and see their book on the new releases table.
100%. In this book, in your book, in The Most Famous Girl in the World, there are so many great twists and turns. It's definitely a roller coaster ride. So I'm curious, do you plot most of your twists before you write, or do some come as a surprise to you too through the process of writing? How does that work?
That's a great question. I am a plotter. I am so blown away by authors who are pantsers. I know many. You guys are the true superheroes. I could never do what you do. I mean, every night before I go to sleep, I basically outline my day. So I can't imagine not outlining my books.
Mhm.
So I definitely have a sense of what I'm going to write when I sit down to write. However, I always joke that, sometimes my characters pants me. So I think they're going to end up behaving one way. And once I'm actually at the line level, the
Mhm.
math isn't mathing, the chemistry isn't coming together, and I end up changing what I'm doing. The ending of The Most Famous Girl in the World was actually one of the first parts of the book that I ideated. And I think the reason being, I wanted to write a book that I knew would be better on reread. I wanted it to be full of Easter eggs and foreshadowing. I wanted to keep readers guessing until the very last page.
Mhm.
Um, I think that if readers find themselves questioning their own intuition and their own sanity and attempting to maybe justify characters' actions despite never really knowing them or being inside of their head, then I will have like broken the fourth wall, created something a bit meta, and truly have done my job. Because
Mhm.
ultimately, like I try so hard to remind readers throughout the book, this is satire. There's navel gazing going on here. This is tongue in cheek. I'm winking at the reader the entire time. Um,
Mhm.
and then also, once I realized that I was going to play with genre. I really wanted to play with true crime and thriller tropes, and I had a lot of fun doing that. Um, Whenever people tell me they're reading the book and they're enjoying it, I always have to say, "Well, have you reached the last third yet?
Mm.
Because we should probably talk after you finish the last third." Um, but yes, my message to all people who embark on this journey: I'm sorry about the last third of this book. You're welcome. And if you are mad at me, feel free to leave me a voice note over DM screaming at me. Many have, and they make my day. So,
I love that. We heard in the blurbs everyone talking about your distinct and sharp-edged voice. And that is true. How did you develop the voice?
oh my gosh. Well, first of all, I didn't get a chance to say this. Thank you for the beautiful intro. And thank you to all of my incredible blurbers who read early copies of this book. Life hack: write a book, then use that as an excuse to force all of your idols to become friends with you. But actually, I was thinking about this earlier today because I was going through my blurbs. I'm so grateful for the authors who have given me such like incredibly candid advice and supported me, and I'm paying it forward. You know, every dollar is going towards your books too. I love you guys. Grateful for the community I have. My my voice, honestly, Rose's voice is it has a lot more cynicism
Mm.
and a lot more bite to it than Nora's did. My protagonist of my debut novel was very she was hopeful, naive, um, perhaps a little bit frustratingly so at times. Um, you know, looking back and reading that prose, she reminds me sort of like a younger sister or a more blue-eyed, bushy-tailed like version of myself when I first entered media. Rose is not so much. She is already jaded. Rose is angry. Rose, um, you know, meets people assuming she'll dislike them, and they have to prove otherwise to her. So that was a really fun character to write because I am not that way. I am incredibly extroverted, and I love meeting new people. And I um, have been in therapy for many years. So it was very fun to write a character who was more likely to bark when she first meets people. Very fun to write a character who like softens over the course of the novel rather than hardens. And it was really fun um, to write a version of New York, which, unlike my debut, which painted New York as like fantastical and almost like this mythical place, really, really romanticized version of New York, to create a version of New York that was like more sort of like dark and grimy and crowded and you know, the kind of city that you can't help but complain about, but will also never leave. Because I think these are two sides of the same New York. And
Mhm.
I love to think about characters from both novels riding the subway together and having completely different experiences. And in terms of my overall voice, I am very blessed to be able to say that I have been writing professionally for over a decade. I worked as a journalist and a freelance writer and editor for about, yeah, about a decade before I decided to transition to fiction. And I've been developing my voice over many, many years. And um, I think that there is a through line between all of my work, and it is perhaps like my observation, my observational power that I bring up through the way that I write. I love clunky, unexpected analogies and metaphors. I love writing in a way that is almost like grotesquely funny. And yeah, I mean, the greatest compliment I've ever received is that reading a novel, it feels like receiving a very long voice note from me. A friend texted me that a couple weeks ago, and
Wow.
I read that and I thought to myself, how cool that, like, if I strip back all the layers of my writing, all of the storytelling, all of the character development, the one thing that remains is me, and that I put
Yeah.
so much of myself in my stories. And I'm definitely a voice forward writer. And I know that isn't for everyone, but I've always been so attracted to voice forward writing. I was raised on Meg Cabot. So
Mhm.
to me, if I can pick up a book and tell that it was written by one of my favorite authors, regardless of the story and the characters, then I know I'm in for a treat.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the journalism. You're an acclaimed journalist. You're a Forbes 30 under 30 honoree. How did you get started in journalism, and how did you develop your focus on sex and relationships?
Oh my gosh. My heart is always in sex and relationships. Everyone is, but we don't know it. Yes, I again, like, I've been extraordinarily lucky to have many years of experience writing and editing and working with incredible writers, and learning from them. But I wrote my first op-ed when I was 15 years old. It was about my experience with Islamophobia growing up in a post 9/11 New York. And I
Mhm.
wrote it and submitted it to HuffPost Teen, which at the time was a subsection of HuffPost, which I believe does not exist anymore.
Mm.
And I was totally mind blown when they decided to publish it. And that sort of opened up a whole new door to me in terms of what I thought I was capable of doing at that age.
Mm.
So for the next 8 years, 7, 8 years or so, as I was finishing my education and interning and trying to learn the ins and outs of different parts of media and publishing, I was also spending time attempting to freelance write. So when I say attempting, I mean I was building my portfolio. And, now as I enter my 30s, that looks like it was a robust achievement. But
Mhm.
in actuality, it meant hundreds and hundreds of no replies, of rejections over the course of like a decade. And I was very young,
Mm.
and luckily had the time and space to grow as a writer and improve and sharpen my pen, if you will. Um, so yeah, I mean, I started really young. When I graduated college, my first job, um, full time editorial job, was as an assistant at Teen Vogue during sort of like the height of its socio-political evolution. It was a really exciting time to be there. I was able to write for both digital and print, and got like a crash course in what it's like to work for a magazine. I was there until the magazine folded. And from there, I went to Bustle, where I worked as a lifestyle staff writer. And as at Bustle, I was reporting into the sex and relationships editor, and fell in love with the universality of the vertical. I think, like,
Mm.
a lot of people think sex and relationships, they think like sex advice, dating apps, singledom, all of that, which is amazing and necessary. And what is more commonplace than love and wanting to fall in love and loving and be loved? But sex and relationships always also encompasses sexuality, gender identity, consent, sexual health, sexual education, so many really, really cool parts of the common human experience that there isn't enough accessible, relatable, non-jargony material out there for young
Mm.
people to have access to. And something I could talk about for literally years and years and years is how so much of what's messed up about society is rooted in the lack of sex education access,
Mhm.
or I should say medically accurate sex education access in the States. So I felt very called to do to contribute to that gap, to filling in that gap. And from Bustle, I went to Elite Daily, worked as a sex and dating editor there very, very cool opportunity. The entire time I was freelance writing for, a variety of different places. I had a column at the now defunct Man Repeller. Ended up going back to Bustle to relaunch the Sex and Relationships vertical, which was very cool, very full circle. Um, Left and was working at her campus media, where I was relaunching the site for a Gen Z audience, as the site lead when 100 Other Girls was going into edit. So
Wow.
I know what a time to be alive. I was like editing and marketing the novel. I was working full time um, as an editor with an incredible team of like talented young people beneath me. Then I was also freelance writing. So I was doing 3 different jobs, and I got to a point where I had to sit down with myself and say, I cannot give 100% of my attention and bandwidth to either one of these things that I care so much about. They both deserve 100% of someone's bandwidth. And ultimately, I knew that if I didn't do everything in my power to see through the success of 100 Other Girls, I'd always wonder what if. So I ended up leaving full-time media work a month before my debut novel came out, and have been freelance writing ever since. And being able to pay the rent with my words is a full-time job and a dream come true. So like I have to say that gratitude is the one word I always return to, because this isn't just someone's childhood dream, it's my childhood dream. Sorry, such a long winded answer, and then
It was a great answer. No, I love all the detail. I mean, it's long answers are great. Long answers are great here.
you
How
caught me on a very nostalgic day, I will say.
what was the road to publication like for you? So how did you kind of make that decision to make the leap into starting to write fiction? And then what did that journey look like to getting a publishing deal?
That's a great question. Well, 100 Other Girls was a book that I pulled a lot from my own personal experience, the experience of my coworkers, my friends, news stories, industry gossip. It, the last 10 years has been so tumultuous for anyone working in print and digital media. Um, and the story of 100 Other Girls was one that I was ruminating on for maybe over 5 years before I finally sat down and put pen to paper. And that meant a lot of silent observing, daydreaming, ideating, scribbling in my notes app, leaving myself voice notes. But it wasn't until I got to a point of disillusionment with my own career where I decided, okay, I really want to have something of my own, something that can be creatively mine, that isn't secondarily owned by an editor or a manager or a brand or a company who doesn't really have any investment or care for me as a person or an individual. Because in the end of the day, you know, media is an industry that's again run by capitalism and by suits that are just trying to meet a bottom line like any other industry. So when the rose-colored glasses came off, I was ready to sit down and prioritize my own work. So that meant spending months coming home from the office, pouring myself a glass of wine, and hitting a word count. Also writing on the train, in waiting rooms, in transit, wherever I could get it in. I set myself up on a tight schedule because one thing I learned working in media is that deadlines are the only way you will get writing done in a timely manner. And I was done with my first draft in, oh gosh, maybe 4-ish months, which is crazy to.
Wow. When
Um,
did you sleep?
oh, I don't. I forgot to mention I have horrible insomnia. So Sleep has never been the number one priority for me because I'll probably be awake anyway.
Mhm.
Um, but no, it was really fun at that time to have my own, something of my own, a secret. I loved coming to the office and being like, hee hee, no one knows what I did last night. Which sounds super sexual, and I guess it was the sexual awakening of my book. But I I wrote it in, fall of 2019. I edited it in early 2020, and then the pandemic happened, and I put it to bed. I thought, one, I don't have the emotional bandwidth to be working on this right now. Two, it feels gross to be like pushing myself forward or promoting myself or querying right now.
Mm.
Um, you know, I also I was scared. New York was the epicenter of the pandemic in the States, sorry, at the beginning. And I know a lot of people personally affected. Working in media meant all hands on deck um, in terms of health coverage. And yeah, I felt sort of discouraged at that point. But then, summer of 2020, following the killing of George Floyd and real conversations about D&I in the workplace, um, all industries, but especially media and fashion, were having really serious dialogues about what equity would look like inside of media. And people were coming forward and talking about their own experiences. And for the first time in months, I thought, does my story have a place in this conversation? Like, do I have something of value to say? And, would it benefit people to learn, you know, sort of like a slice of life of what I've witnessed working in this is very competitive, like pretty whitewashed industry for about a decade. So I returned to my draft. I begun querying. I signed with my agent, and we sold the book that fall. At the time, it felt like every minute was painful, and submission. I felt like submission felt like walking down a runway naked and asking every rate you out of 10. It's so vulnerable to really, really care about something and in some ways work on it for like years and years and years and then send it to a bunch of people that don't know you and say, "Well, let me know what you think." In retrospect, I was really fortunate that I met my editor early on and we connected and she understood it and we've been working together ever since. And um, I'm so grateful that I get to write sort of like funny, accessible books about real aspects of everyday life. And I get to feature like a large cast of diverse voices in the process. I feel like I'm like an evil mastermind. I've tricked people into letting me do it.
What do you know now that you would have liked to have known then before you published your first book?
Another great question. um, Gosh, yeah, my number one piece of advice to my younger self is that it's okay to walk away from something that is no longer serving you. I think
Mm.
a lot of young women are taught that giving up is a form of weakness, but I think walking away can actually be a form of strength. It means putting yourself first and making peace with something not working out, and instead, opening yourself up to something that'll actually make you happy and, um, yeah, be better for your mental health. But before I published the book, I put on a child lock on Goodreads and create boundaries between yourself and your audience. I thought that like a decade working in media had prepared me for publishing a book because for years and years and years, I'd like publish an article that was like very personal, and it would, it would be everything from like my history with mental illness to like masturbating, and it would be first person, and the next day, thousands and thousands of people will have read it, and I will getting like disgusting messages. And I laughed all that off. Like for the most part, I was fine with it. Publishing the book. So I was like, I can handle this, no problem. This isn't even about me. But gosh, nothing could have prepared me for the sort of like parasocial aspects of publishing, because you work on something for so many years, and then, if you're lucky, thousands of strangers will read it in like a day's time and give
Mhm.
you their full thoughts. So, um, putting up boundaries, whether that is, like child lock on any review site, not Googling yourself, um, restrictions on tag requests on Instagram, not watching your mentions on TikTok, whatever you need to do to like make yourself be able to sleep at night is great. And I mean that not just in terms of negative reviews. I mean positive
Mm.
reviews too. Because I think positive reviews too can oftentimes like go to your head, or if you place too much power in positive validation, it means that negative validation also has it is given the same weight. The only validation should come from inside yourself. You should the only thing that should validate your voice and talent and ability should be your inner belief that like you have something of value to add, and that you've done everything you can um, to make sure you're telling that story with integrity. So
That's
yeah,
fantastic advice.
another long answer.
Fantastic. It's fantastic advice. I have a traditional final question
Sure.
podcast, and it is, when the most famous girl in the world is made into a movie or series, what do you think the theme song should be?
Oh my gosh, I've actually been thinking about this. I'm so happy you asked this. Really. Okay, so I have two songs. One is way more likely because the other one, to my knowledge, is still unreleased. But there's a song, so I'll start with the unreleased one. So there's a song by Lana Del Rey that a lot of people know because her unreleased music has been circulating for decades. But I don't think people can listen to it legally, but it's called Serial Killer. And it's so perfect for Most Famous Girl. Yeah, the lyrics of the chorus are literally like, baby, I'm a sociopath, a serial killer on the warpath because I love you just a little too much. It's like, it's literally like the story. It feels to me like Rose and Poppy talking to each other. One. But legally, I feel like that's not gonna happen for me unless, Lana, you're listening, and I I have been listening to you forever. I was actually at your SNL performance and I thought you sounded great. So, call me. I've seen you live like 6 times. Um, the song that I think is more likely is Psycho Killer would be perfect too.
Oh yeah, that would be good.
Perfect. I think it reminds me of the Pink Panther theme song when you have the two animated versions of Clouseau and the Pink Panther chasing each other.
Mhm.
I imagine an animated Rose and Poppy chasing each other to Psycho Killer every time I hear that song. So,
And
yeah.
now so will I.
Thank you for asking that, because as you can tell, this one's been percolating.
Great answer.
Thank you.
Iman Hariri-Kia, it has been such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for making my day.
Thanks for joining us on Literary Prospects. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. We'll see you next time.